The air in the Small World flume maintenance tunnels didn't smell like the cookies and vanilla pumped into the guest areas upstairs. Down here it smelled of stagnant water, heavy industrial lubricant, and the sharp metallic tang of ozone. Elena wiped a streak of hydraulic fluid from her forehead with the back of a gloved hand. At 44, she spent nearly half her life maintaining the magic, and her knees let her know it every time she had to crouch in these 4-foot-high concrete crawl spaces. To her, the animatronics weren't whimsical characters. They were a collection of solenoids, pneumatic valves, and fiberglass shells that needed constant tweaking to keep from looking like twitching corpses. "Control, this is L7, she muttered into her shoulder mic, her voice raspy from the damp air. "I'm at the Sector 4 junction, right under the rainforest scene. I've got a localized power fluctuation in the dull drive assembly. Requesting a temporary lockout on the water jets so I don't get soaked while I'm in the guts of this thing." "Copy that, Elena," the voice crackled back. "Lockout confirmed. You have a 10-minute window before the automated flush begins. Don't stay down there too long. It's quiet tonight, even for a Tuesday." Elena clicked on her flashlight, the beam cutting through the heavy mist rising from the ride's canal. She crawled into the narrow gap beneath the tracks, the wooden floorboards above her vibrating with the muffled rhythmic thump-thump-thump of the empty boats cycling through the darkness. She reached the primary control box for the rainforest dolls. It was an old-style panel, the kind the park had been promising to replace since the 90s. As she pried the rusted cover open, she noticed something that made her pulse skip. Taped to the inside of the panel was a small, hand-drawn diagram that wasn't part of the official manual. It showed a single toggle switch labeled Protocol 0 Observation. Underneath it, someone had scribbled in faded ink, "They only sing when they think we're listening." Elena stared at the faded ink. "They only sing when they think we're listening." "Smartass," she whispered, though her skin prickled. It was probably just a joke left by Joe, the tech who retired last year with a drinking problem and a grudge against the mouse. Still, her eyes kept drifting back to that toggle. It was a heavy industrial-grade switch, tucked behind a nest of frayed wiring that didn't seem to lead to any of the primary doll motors. She reached for her multimeter to check the power fluctuation, but as her hand neared the wires, the rhythmic thump-thump of the boats above stopped. Total silence in a Disney ride is never actually silent. There's the hiss of the hydraulics, the trickle of the water, the hum of the HVAC, but this was different. The hum died, the hiss vanished. It was as if the building itself had held its breath. "Control, this is Elena," she said, tapping her mic. "I just lost all ambient power in Sector 4. Did you guys pull the main breaker?" Silence. Not even the comforting static of an open line. She pulled her radio off her shoulder. The LED screen was dead. She shook it, then pulled the battery. The plastic felt unnaturally cold, like it had been sitting in a freezer. Then, from the darkness further down the tunnel, back toward the European section, she heard it. It wasn't the song. It was a series of rapid, rhythmic clicks. Click, click, whir. Click, click, whir. It sounded like hundreds of tiny cameras focusing all at once. Elena froze. Her breathing was the loudest thing in the crawl space. A ragged, shallow sound that seemed to echo off the damp concrete. She slowly pivoted her heavy-duty mag light, the beam cutting a sharp white circle through the hanging mist. The clicking had stopped. She swept the light down the tunnel toward the European section. At this angle, she was looking up through the gaps in the floorboards and the support joists. She could see the underside of the Small World dolls, the metal armatures, the plastic joints, the unpainted fiberglass backs of their heads. Then she saw it. About 30 feet away, a row of Dutch children's dolls were positioned on a rotating platform. Normally, they would be swaying side to side in a simple looped animation, but now they weren't on their platform. The beam of her light caught the edge of a porcelain white face, peering down through a gap in the floorboards. Then another, and another. They weren't swaying. They were leaning over the edge of the track, their heads tilted at an impossible, neck-snapping angle, staring directly down into the maintenance tunnel. Their glass eyes didn't just reflect her flashlight. They seemed to absorb it. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. "Just a mechanical failure," she whispered, her voice cracking. "The servos locked up, gravity pulled them forward, that's all." But gravity didn't account for the sound that followed. From the darkness above, a voice spoke. It wasn't the high-pitched, chirping tone of a Dutch doll. It was a low, grainy playback, distorted but unmistakable. It was the sound of Elena's own voice from 3 minutes ago. "It's quiet tonight, even for a Tuesday," the doll whispered. Then the clicking started again, faster this time. Click, click, whir. Click, click, whir. It wasn't the dolls focusing their eyes. It was the sound of their tiny plastic hands gripping the edges of the floorboards as they began to pull themselves down into the crawl space with her. Elena didn't have time to weigh the risks. The first plastic hand, small, four-fingered, and stained with decades of tunnel grime, clamped onto the support beam just inches from her boot. She lunged for the control panel. Her fingers fumbled against the cold metal, catching on the heavy industrial toggle. With a guttural grunt, she slammed the switch upward. Protocol 0 active. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the entire tunnel groaned. It wasn't a mechanical sound. It was the deep, resonant vibration of a massive power draw, like a jet engine spooling up deep beneath the Florida limestone. The observation mode didn't reset the dolls. It changed them. The rapid clicking of their movements stopped instantly. The dolls froze mid-descent, dangling from the floorboards like oversized spiders. The grainy, distorted playback of Elena's voice cut off, replaced by a low-frequency hum that she felt in her teeth. Then the small LED screen of the old control panel flickered to life. It didn't show voltage or pressure. It showed a scrolling list of text, glowing a sickly pale green. Data upload in progress. Subject, Elena V. Pulse, 114 BPM. Adrenaline, peak. Memory fragment, 884, the red bicycle, 1989. Extracting. Elena stared, paralyzed. Her flashlight rolled out of her hand, its beam sweeping across the dolls above. They weren't looking at her anymore. Their heads had rolled back, their eyes pointing toward the ceiling, as if they were transmitting something to a satellite miles above the park. A small hidden speaker inside the control room hissed. A voice, not a recording, but a synthesized, perfect imitation of her late father, spoke through the static. "Elena, honey, why did you never tell them where you hid the bike?" The dolls all twitched in unison. Their mouths opened wide, wider than their hinges should have allowed, and a soft, white light began to bleed out of their throats. Elena backed away, her hands scraping against the rough concrete of the tunnel floor. The personal nature of the voice had bypassed her professional shield, leaving her raw and terrified. How do you know that?" she choked out. That's not on any server." The dolls didn't answer with words. Instead, they began to rotate their torsos 180 degrees. The sound of plastic grinding against metal filled the tunnel. They were no longer trying to reach her. They were forming a perimeter. Elena squeezed her eyes shut, trying to drown out the voice of her father and the grinding of the plastic gears. She realized then that Protocol 0 wasn't a maintenance command. It was a neural interface. The park wasn't just watching her, it was using her. Every spike in her heart rate, every flash of her fear-driven memory of what was being pulled like a thread from a sweater, feeding the machine. If the park was using her mind to build this nightmare, she had to stop being a victim and start being the architect. "It's not real," she hissed, her nails digging into her palms. "It's just data. It's just ones and zeros." The low-frequency hum intensified. vibrating through her skull. The dolls above her began to flicker, their forms blurring like a corrupted video file. The tunnel walls began to bleed the pale light of the control panel, and the smell of the ozone became so thick, it tasted like copper on her tongue. Error. Cognitive resistance detected. Subject Elena V. attempting force sync. Dolls' mouths stayed open, but the white light pouring from their throats began to project images onto the fog in the tunnel. It wasn't just the red bike. It was her first day at the park, her divorce, the hospital room from 3 years ago. The park was trying to overwhelm her with a sensory loop, a small world of her own regrets to keep her paralyzed, while it finished the extraction. Elena realized she couldn't outrun the dolls in this cramped space, but she knew the architecture of the park's OS. She had spent years debugging these systems. "You want my memories?" she growled, her eyes snapping open. They were glowing with the same sickly green as the terminal. "Fine, let's see how you handle the system's own trash." Instead of fighting the fear, she leaned into the memory the park couldn't possibly want. The endless, mind-numbing hours of technical jargon, the 800-page safety manuals, and the repetitive, grinding sounds of the machine shop. She flooded her mind with the image of a single rotating gear, perfect, cold, and devoid of emotion. The dolls above her jerked violently. Their heads began to spin in complete circles, unable to process the dead data she was forcing into the connection. The green text on the monitor began to scramble. Data overload. Non-quantitative input. Rebooting neural archive. The heavy security door at the end of the tunnel, the one that had been dead a moment ago, gave a sharp, pneumatic hiss and slid open 6 inches. Elena didn't wait. She scrambled toward the gap, her work boots slipping on the wet concrete. Behind her, the dolls were falling from the ceiling, their plastic bodies shattering as they hit the ground, no longer held up by the park's will. As she reached the door and shoved her shoulder against the cold steel, the whispering returned. But it wasn't her father anymore. It was 1,000 voices, the voices of every guest who had ever gone missing in the park, every employee who had retired and never been seen again. "Stay, Elena," the chorus whispered. "The show is just beginning." Elena threw her weight against the door, squeezing through the narrow gap into a space that shouldn't have existed according to the park's blueprints. She expected more tunnels. Instead, she found herself on a rustic catwalk overlooking a massive subterranean cavern. The air here was freezing, smelling of formaldehyde and old grease. It was a sprawling junkyard of Disney's failed ambitions. Massive, half-finished armatures of dragons and giants, laid tossed aside like the bones of prehistoric beasts. But as Elena's flashlight swept over the mounds of scrap, she realized with a jolt of nausea why these models had been rejected. They weren't just mechanical. A 1960s-era Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln head sat atop of a pile of rusted gears, but its skin wasn't silicone. It was a gray, preserved membrane that looked suspiciously like human dermis. In another corner, a sprawling Small World sun clock had real, calcified teeth lining its moving gears. They couldn't get the movements right with just pistons. A voice croaked from the shadows of the catwalk. Elena whirled around, her light landing on a man sitting in a slumped-over position against the railing. He wore a maintenance jumpsuit identical to hers, but the fabric was yellowed and brittle with age. His name tag read Joe, the tech who had supposedly retired last year. Except Joe wasn't retired. Half of his face had been upgraded. A brass clockwork eye whirred in his socket, and his jaw was held together by silver wire. The observation mode feeds the park, Joe rasped, his mechanical eye focusing with a series of sharp clicks. It needs a blueprint for life to make the robots look real. It took my memories to learn how a man feels grief. It took my hands to learn how a man works. And now, Elena, it wants your 40 years of magic to fix the latest glitch upstairs. Behind him, a massive, unfinished animatronic, a towering faceless shape, draped in a tattered parade shroud, began to rise from the scrap heap. The thing rising from the graveyard didn't have a voice of its own. As it stood, it began to emit a series of deafening, overlapping voices of every guest Elena had ever checked into the park. Thousands of hellos and thank yous and look mommy blended into a physical wall of sound. Elena didn't hesitate. She knew how the optimization process worked now. It needed a stable, sterile environment to finalize the merge. If she broke the glass, she wouldn't just be falling. She'd be shattering the physical bridge between the digital archive and the park's surface. "If you want me," Elena growled, grabbing a heavy solid steel calibration wrench from her belt, "you're going to have to take the version that breaks." She slammed the wrench into the glass floor. A spiderweb of white fractures bloomed instantly. The servers around her let out a shrill digital shriek, the optimized data stream on the monitor flickering wildly. "Critical system breach. Environmental stability 40%. Warning, unrefined data leak." Through the cracking glass, Elena saw her double stop. The optimized Elena tilted her head, her perfect smile twitching and stretching until it reached her ears. The imposter's eyes began to leak the same thick black hydraulic fluid Elena had seen in the tunnels. It wasn't perfect anymore. It was reacting to the damage in the room above. "Elena, stop!" Joe screamed, reaching out with a trembling, wire-bound hand. "If the glass breaks, the in-between floods the park. Every nightmare we've kept down here, it all goes to the surface." "Good," Elena spat. "Let the guests see what the magic is made of." She swung the wrench again. This time the glass didn't crack. It groaned and buckled. The pressurized air from the server room began to whistle through the fissures, carrying with it the smell of ozone and old forgotten secrets. Below, the shadowy Elena began to vibrate, her form blurring as if she were being viewed through a heat haze. She reached a hand up toward the ceiling, her fingers elongating into jagged metallic needles. With a final desperate roar, Elena brought the wrench down one last time. The glass floor vanished. Elena fell, but it wasn't a clean drop. As she tumbled through the air toward the pristine pavement of Main Street, the world around her began to glitch. The street lamps just didn't illuminate the road. They projected 1950s newsreels onto the fog. The storefronts melted from solid wood into flickering, translucent wireframes. Elena hit the ground hard, the breath leaving her lungs in a painful wheeze. But she wasn't on Main Street anymore. She was in the transformation zone. She looked up to see her double standing over her, but the imposter was no longer a perfect twin. Because the optimization had been interrupted by the fall, the double was a horrific mosaic of every role Elena had ever played in the park. One arm was the organic limb of a 40-year-old woman. The other was heavy, rusted piston from a Jungle Cruise hippo. Half her face was Elena's. The other half was a hollow plastic shell with a single glowing red sensor. "Error," the creature croaked, its voice a terrifying blend of Elena and a skipping record. "Identity. Non-linear. Requires physical calibration." The monster lunged, its needle fingers aiming for Elena's eyes. It wanted to extract the final 2% of her soul manually. Elena scrambled backward against the flickering pavement. As the monster lunged, she realized the ground beneath her wasn't stone anymore. It was a grid of light. This was the raw, unrendered foundation of the park's reality. If the world was made of data, her 40 years of technical knowledge wasn't just a career, it was a superpower. The monster, her optimized self, screeched, its needle fingers grazing Elena's cheek. "Extraction mandatory. You are obsolete." "I am not obsolete," Elena hissed, closing her eyes and reaching out to the air around her. "I'm the one who knows how you're built." She didn't need a weapon. She imagined a hard reset. She visualized the massive breakers in the park's primary substation, the heavy copper switches she had flipped 1,000 times. In her mind, she saw the flow of magic, the data stream, and she pictured a massive iron gate slamming shut. The world around them buckled. The 1950s newsreels playing on the fog began to smoke and char. The optimized twin froze, its piston arm twitching violently. "What are you doing?" the creature wailed. "I'm locking the system," Elena shouted over the digital roar. "Emergency lockout level 5. No one goes in and nothing comes out." The grid lines on the ground turned a deep warning red. The optimized Elena began to dissolve into a cloud of black static. Her form was unable to maintain its shape without the park's constant optimization stream. But the strain was pulling on Elena too. Her own hands began to flicker. turning translucent as the zone tried to reset everything back to zero, including her. The glitch reality began to collapse inward. The tall, thin shadow of the architect appeared one last time, standing at the edge of the dissolving world. It didn't attack, it simply held out a hand. "The park needs a heart, Elena." The architect's voice echoed, sounding like 1,000 turning gears. "Stay, be the ghost in the machine. Keep the gears turning, and you will never grow old. You will never be forgotten. You will be the magic." Elena looked at the hand, then looked back at the optimized twin, which was now just a pile of twitching, weeping scrap. Then she looked up at the sky, where the first faint of light of a real-world dawn was beginning to bleed through the digital clouds. The architect's hand stayed extended, a cold, perfect invitation to immortality. Around them, the digital sky of the transformation zone began to pixelate, falling away in jagged chunks of black code. Elena looked at the shadow, then at her own flickering hands. She could feel the park trying to categorize her, to file her away as senior maintenance lead archived. "I don't belong to the brand," she whispered. She turned her back on the architect. She closed her eyes, ignoring the screeching of the collapsing servers and the smell of ozone. She reached back, deep past the 40 years of Greece, the thousands of hours of Small World, and the corporate training videos. She found the red bicycle. She felt the chipped paint on the handlebars. She smelled the dust of the garage in the summer heat of 1989. It was a messy, imperfect memory. The chain had always slipped, and she scraped her knee the first time she rode it. It was a memory that the park couldn't optimize, because it wasn't just about a polished experience. It was about a girl in a driveway who didn't need a ticket to feel free. "Override," Elena said, her voice steady. "Subject Elena V. Anchor point 1989. Delete the archive. Keep the girl." The architect let out a sound like 1,000 glass bulbs shattering. The optimized double screamed as it was sucked into a digital void. The red grid lines beneath Elena's feet flared into a blinding white light, and for a second she felt herself being pulled apart, her data scattering like confetti. Then there was only weight. Elena opened her eyes. The air was thick and humid, smelling of swamp water and expensive popcorn. She was lying on the pavement of Main Street. The sun was just beginning to peek over the spires of the castle, casting long orange shadows across the pristine bricks. "Elena? You okay, hun?" She blinked, squinting up at a security guard, a real one, a kid in his 20s named Kevin. He was leaning over her, looking worried. I tripped," Elena rasped, her voice feeling like it had been scraped with sandpaper. She sat up, her knees popping. Every joint in her body ached with a glorious human heaviness. "You went radio silent last night," Kevin said, helping her to her feet. "Control sent a team down to the Small World tunnels. But they said the place was empty. Just a blown speaker and some broken dolls. Joe's old locker was standing open, too. Weird night." Elena looked down at her hands. They were solid, no flickering, no green light. She reached into her pocket and felt the heavy steel calibration wrench. "Yeah," Elena said, looking up toward the castle. "Weird night." She walked toward the exit gates, her 40-year-old knees protesting every step. She didn't look back at the Small World building. She didn't look at the cameras. But as she passed the partner statue at the hub, she paused. For a split second, the brass eyes of the founder statue seemed to track her movement, and from the hidden speakers in the flower beds, the Small World song began to play. Just a few bars, slowed down, distorted, and whispered in a voice that sounded exactly like her father's. Elena didn't stop. She clocked out, walked to her car, and drove away. In the Small World flume, a new doll had been added to the European scene overnight. It was a female technician in a high-vis vest, holding a tiny wrench. It didn't sing, it didn't sway. It just stood perfectly still, its glass eyes watching the guests, waiting for the next observation mode to begin.